Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something, well, something that's a bedrock assumption of modern life.
We're talking about housing.
Specifically, why housing has become, for millions of people, the default retirement plan, the security blanket, really the main investment vehicle.
And our mission today, it's not to cast judgment on that, not at all. It's more to analyze the mechanics behind it.
To understand the why.
Exactly. Why did the whole financial system seem to funnel people toward property as the main path for security? And then the big question, what would a realistic alternative actually need to look like to change that?
And that's the core tension, right? It's the point where these sources we're looking at, they really start to bite.
Yeah.
Because for the vast majority of people who bought a home or maybe even became a small-scale landlord, this didn't feel like some high-stakes speculation.
No, it didn't feel like greed.
It felt like common sense, like simple, boring financial prudence in a world where, other secure options just seem to have vanished.
And that idea of prudence is exactly the right place to start. If we're going to challenge this central role of property, we can't just talk about, say, regulating housing.
Yeah.
We have to analyze what other high-quality, stable choices were, or maybe more importantly, weren't available for you to park your savings and, protect them over 20 or 30 years.
Okay, let's unpack this. How did housing get this starring role in the first place?
Well, the sources all seem to agree it starts with something really simple.
It's tangibility, the fact that you can touch it.
Exactly. When you buy a share, you're getting a digital line on a screen. When you buy a home, you get a physical asset. You can see it, you can touch it, you can rent it out. It's just instantly understandable.
That makes sense. It's real.
That visceral appeal is huge, but it was basically amplified, exponentially, by these massive shifts in the wider economy. We're talking about three big factors that all kind of converged at the perfect time.
Okay, so what were those forces?
First, interest rates.
Globally, they started this decades-long decline, which made mortgages cheaper, obviously.
Right. But at the same time, it completely cratered the return on safe things, like savings accounts or government bonds.
Yeah.
So if you were trying to save for retirement, suddenly there was no passive, low-risk way to beat inflation.
So the safe money wasn't safe from losing value anymore.
Precisely. Then second, you have the structural erosion of pensions, that shift away from defined benefit plans.
Where your employer guaranteed you an income for life.
Yes. That shifted to defined contribution plans, and that meant the entire risk, the whole responsibility for your retirement funding was just downloaded onto you, the individual. You now had to find a place to invest your cash and make it grow safely.
And the third factor?
Wages.
Yeah.
Simple as that. In so many developed economies, especially for the middle class, wages just stopped keeping pace.
They stagnated.
They did. And when your income is stagnating, you start looking for a way for your assets to do the heavy lifting that your job used to do.
So let me see if I've got this right. You've got people who are suddenly forced to manage their own retirement. They are facing almost zero returns on any safe savings.
Right.
Their wages aren't really growing. And then at the very same time, house prices just keep rising, sometimes dramatically. The home became the one clear, reliable thing that seemed to defy gravity.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
And one study the sources cite calls these people accidental rentiers.
Accidental rentiers. I like that.
It's perfect, isn't it? They're people who never really wanted the stress of being a landlord, but they saw buying a second property or even just paying off their own home as fast as possible as the only sensible hedge against a completely uncertain financial future.
So the home started doing double duty?
Double duty. It's your shelter, and it's your primary mechanism for financial stability. For most people, this felt like an act of defense, not offense.
That reframing is so important. It suggests that if the financial system had just provided other good, reliable ways to get that stability, the pressure on housing might never have gotten this high.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the next logical question in this deep dive. Is this obsession we see really with bricks and mortar? Or is the house just, the most convenient proxy for a much deeper need?
What are you getting at there?
Well, let's just think about what a typical saver is actually looking for. They aren't usually chasing hypergrowth or venture capital returns.
No, they want something safe.
They want steady, predictable returns that can reliably beat inflation. They want protection from, major institutional failures, and they want something tangible that won't just vanish overnight in a financial crisis.
So if those are the fundamental needs, stability and protection from inflation, then the sources are basically saying housing is just the vehicle. It's not the ultimate destination.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
It's the means, not the end.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we can accept that the house is just a delivery mechanism for stable returns, then the goal isn't to discourage people from property.
No.
The goal is to create a superior vehicle, one that delivers those same financial outcomes, but without the negative side effect of, pushing up the cost of shelter for everybody else.
And that's the whole game. I mean, think about it. Why did housing win out over, say, the stock market for so many people?
Well, leverage, for one.
Leverage is a huge one. You can leverage a home purchase with a mortgage in a way that's incredibly difficult for the average person to do with a portfolio of stocks. And the other is that tangibility we talked about. It provides this huge psychological comfort, especially after you've seen crises where abstract assets just vaporized.
So if a new investment existed that was accessible, that allowed for prudent leverage and gave you that inflation-proof stability.
Then the financial imperative to become a homeowner or a landlord, it just diminishes dramatically. It doesn't go away, but it's much, much less powerful.
Okay, so if we accept that, we have to define what this alternative vehicle would have to look like. You said it was a high bar.
It is a high bar.
And it can't be something esoteric or volatile. We need to be really honest about what a long-term, responsible investor is actually looking for.
We do. And we should probably get rid of the idea that this alternative has to be exciting or revolutionary. In fact, it needs to be the opposite.
The anti-excitement investment.
It has to feel relentlessly boring, or utterly predictable,
Mm.
and explicitly long-term.
Boring is good then. No day trading required.
Absolutely not. It can't be a get-rich-quick scheme. It has to be something people choose precisely because they don't want to think about it every day.
Yeah.
That's the real utility that housing offers, right? It's relatively set and forget once your mortgage is sorted.
Okay, so let's get into the financial requirements because this is starting to sound a bit like a fantasy product. You need steady inflation-linked returns, low volatility, and it has to be accessible. Do the sources point to any real-world model that even comes close to this outside of property?
That is the core challenge. The bar is basically defined by what people lost when their old pensions and their high-yield savings accounts disappeared. It needs to offer reliable, real returns, meaning returns that consistently outpace the cost of living, but without the wild swings you see in tech stocks or commodities.
So low volatility inflation hedging.
Backed by something real. And then there's the crucial social utility part.
What do you mean by that?
This alternative investment. It really shouldn't depend on making someone else's life materially worse. Housing investment benefits from scarcity. If homes become less affordable, your asset becomes more valuable. A successful alternative just cannot rely on that same mechanism.
And that is the defining ethical problem with the system right now, isn't it? My prudent decision to invest in a home to secure my future, it requires a continuous struggle for the next generation of buyers or renters for my investment to hold its value.
That realization is powerful. The sources point out that property is this rare asset class where your individual benefit is directly tied to a collective constraint.
So the alternative has to flip that script.
It has to. Your return must be generated by adding social value or stabilizing something essential, not by profiting from scarcity.
That is a remarkably high bar. Reliability, tangibility, stability, and genuine social responsibility all rolled into one product.
It is an incredibly high bar.
Yeah.
But let's not forget the core finding here. This is exactly the standard that housing has quietly been clearing for years.
That's a great bar.
Housing has offered stability, it has offered inflation protection, and often reliable income streams. It became the de facto responsible choice because it met all these demanding criteria better than any other mass-market financial product out there.
Which leads us to, I think, the most conceptually fascinating part of this deep dive, the whole idea of separating investment from ownership.
Right.
Because right now, investing in housing means you have to own the physical asset, you control access to it, and crucially, your investment benefits from scarcity.
But if you zoom out a bit, does financial investment really need to be bundled with personal ownership? Historically, the answer is no. I mean, look at other sectors. Infrastructure, utilities, long-term construction projects. You can invest in the provision of this service without owning the specific nuts and bolts.
Okay, give me an analogy to make that clearer. If I invest in, say, an energy company, I'm not buying a single high-voltage power line.
Exactly. You're not buying the smart meter outside your neighbor's home. You're buying shares in the utility company, the entity that designs, builds, and reliably delivers the whole electrical grid.
My return comes from the long-term need for electricity, not from artificially restricting the number of outlets in a town.
Perfect. You're investing in the system, in the provision, and the maintenance.
So applying that logic from the sources, the big consequential question is this. Could we create a vehicle where you invest in housing provision, the creation, maintenance, and delivery of homes, without needing to personally own the individual house?
That's the pivotal shift that the sources are advocating for. Imagine if you could create these reliable, long-term funds, maybe structured as trusts or specific kinds of bonds that invest exclusively in, say, building new sustainable social housing or maintaining essential rental stock or financing green building upgrades.
You'd have
You
mechanisms.
would. An investor gets their boring, predictable, inflation-linked return. It's backed by tangible assets, the buildings themselves, and long-term societal contracts like rental income or government leases. And crucially, their return is tied to the efficiency and volume of the housing supply, not its scarcity.
That changes the entire behavior. Your success is now linked to ensuring more people have reliable shelter, not fewer.
Exactly. I mean, think about the potential systemic shifts. If a genuinely reliable, low-volatility investment like that existed, and it was accessible and backed by something tangible, the primary financial incentive for millions of people to become accidental landlords it vanishes.
And if fewer people feel they have to buy rental properties just to fund their retirement, that pressure on starter homes on the bottom end of the property ladder, it has to ease.
It would ease. Now, it wouldn't solve the housing crisis overnight, but it would shift the fundamental motivation of the market.
It will let housing stop trying to be everything at once.
Yes, it could be shelter first, and investment could be channeled through these separate, dedicated financial instruments that are actually designed for long-term provision.
So the housing market could focus on providing homes, and the retirement system could focus on providing stable returns.
The two functions would finally be decoupled.
This whole discussion sidesteps the immediate blame and suspicion that usually dominates conversations about property.
Tries to.
This deep dive isn't about shaming people who invested responsibly. It's about recognizing that the financial system we have, it quietly funneled everyone toward property because, for decades, it was the only sensible option available that met those really high criteria of stability and reliability.
That's the core of it.
So what does this all mean?
It means the solution to the housing crisis might not primarily be in, say, punitive regulation of existing property owners.
Yeah.
The solution might actually be in creative financial design giving savings somewhere else reliable and boring to go.
So we need to shift the focus.
We need to shift the focus away from the moral argument, that looping debate over should we be allowed to invest in property, and shift it toward the practical design challenge of creating a better asset.
Which brings us to the final necessary question that the sources really pose for us, and I think for you, the listener, to think about. We've established the need, we've defined the very high, bar-reliable, boring, inflation-linked. So what would a good, boring, socially useful investment alternative actually look like? One that could be a valid alternative to property, that could reduce pressure on homes, and critically, one that doesn't rely on scarcity to generate its returns.